premiers of 5 provinces are turning up the heat on the federal government. They are demanding Ottawa remove the carbon tax from all forms of home heating. In an open letter, the premiers of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta are calling for a meeting with the Prime Minister. In the letter, the premiers say they're pleased Atlantic Canada received a carbon price exemption on home heating oil, but they believe similar exemptions need to follow in the name of fairness. CTV's Colton Praill has details on this for us this morning. So, Colton, we've got 5 premiers saying they want to have a sit-down with the Prime Minister over the carbon tax. What's the latest?
It's the next step, Marcia. This is the ratcheting up of the pressure and the political tension that we've seen over the last 2 weeks since this carbon tax carve-out for oil-based home heating was announced. These are premiers who have already said they want to see that exemption expanded. They said it last weekend at the meeting between all of the premiers. Scott Moe, who posted this open letter, has been saying this for the last 2 weeks, even saying he'd go farther as far as not collecting the carbon tax on natural gas in his province through the Crown Corporation that runs it. But this really is a ratcheting up of the pressure on the federal government, reiterating that call to meet with the Prime Minister on this topic and reframing this discussion, as they have been for the last 2 weeks, as a divisive and unfair policy. The oil carbon tax exemption mostly hits Atlantic Canada. It hits 3% of Canadians, but the majority of those are in PEI, they're in Nova Scotia, and to a certain extent, they're in Newfoundland as well. And so these premiers, especially the ones in central Canada, are saying, well, we're in an affordability crisis too, and we need to see the same changes. The challenges, though, is that the federal government has been pretty clear about this. They're not changing their tune. They say this is the only carbon tax carve-out, and so now we're at an impasse even as that political tension rises.
Will the Prime Minister even meet with the premiers?
At this point, he hasn't, and there's no indication that that's what's coming up. This isn't the first time the premiers have asked for him either. It's been about 18 months since we had a first ministers meeting, which is where the Prime Minister meets with all of the premiers across the country. So this is the second time in just about a week that we've heard calls from these premiers saying we need a sit down with the leader of the country. There are topics that we have to discuss. This clearly top of mind for many of those premiers, but there's no indication that the federal government is bowing to that pressure, and that is in its own right ratcheting up the tensions for these premiers who feel they're being ignored, who feel their constituents are being put in a position that adds an extra burden to their residents that doesn't exist in other parts of Canada. And it certainly doesn't help when you have Liberal ministers going on, national political shows and saying, vote for more Liberals and that will get you these kinds of exemptions.
So in terms of the implications, Colton?
The challenge is really what becomes of the carbon tax moving forward. With this ask to remove all forms of home heating from the carbon tax, it puts a significant dent in carbon policy. Over 50% of Canadians use natural gas to heat their home, and if you remove that, there is no longer an incentive to shift from fossil fuel-based forms of heating to something that's more efficient, that creates less pollution, like electricity. And Canada is already failing its environmental targets. We heard that last week. So the federal government finds themselves in a very tough situation where the policies they have aren't doing enough. There's calls to diminish those policies, and they know they still need to hit those targets, but they also need to solve an affordability crisis. And at this point, none of the steps they're taking are doing either of those things.
Colton Praill in Ottawa for us. Thank you so much.